but when I was typing the agenda.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think we can dispense with the opening statement. Exchange of materials. Any?
No, sir.
No.
Okay. Old business. Possible TA for management right issues. Want to start in, Lori?
Sure. This is the same list that was on the agenda previously under new business, except that I moved the 2 items down that under handbook that we had decided were more management. I moved 1 down, and then I moved the grievance off, I think, entirely from this discussion, and it'll have to be on a future agenda. And I don't think I added anything else, because I didn't really look back through it that much. I did notice on Article 5, that is also our next item on new business, so I guess maybe when we get down to that last one, we could just dump it into the Article 5 new business if we want to on that. So the first one that I had marked as management rights was 8.4.2. Oh, I also took out the ones that we did the package that we were referring to as the
May we
package.
discuss that before we start in on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, so that's most likely my misunderstanding, but in my notes, before we had the long caucus and came back with the TA for the package, I had listed Articles 3, 4, 6, 13, and 14.
Mm-hmm.
The city wanted to strike 13 and 14 being wrapped up in 3, 4, and 6. But at the end of the meeting, the package included Article 7. So we did not discuss Article 7 as a team, and I don't recall discussing it during the meeting. But if we did, I just want to take accountability for that. It was my misunderstanding, and we'd like to back up and discuss it. It's a little different than 3, 4, 6, 13, and 14, and so.
For some reason, I put a little note next, a little dot next to them, and for some reason I put a dot, but I don't think I took any more notes than I put a little dot.
Can you give us the reference again?
Yes, sir, that's Article 7.
Okay.
Current language calls it rules and regulations. Proposed language calls it policies and procedures.
Mm-hmm.
So you wish to discuss it again?
Yes, sir.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
That's our request. So our understanding of the city's proposal is to change that rules and regulations to policies and procedures. We see this throughout the agreement, and we can TA that. But the proposal is to just carry over the handbook language. However, when you read our current language, it includes a process for review. It starts, let's see, probably the 3rd sentence, at least 2 weeks. Does everyone see that?
Oh, I see it.
At least 2 weeks before the implementation of new department rules and regulations, the chief shall provide draft language changes to the union president for comment, and then it goes from there.
Mm-hmm.
That is something, though we can update the language to match the way we've been saying things. That is something that we wish to keep.
Through the remainder of Article 7, or just that sentence.
No, ma'am. Through the remainder. I just read that first sentence
Perfect.
to get us started. It essentially outlines a review process. It does not hold the chief to that. It just simply provides a mechanism of feedback.
Are you suggesting
formal process.
keeping the parenthetical as well or not?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so everything from at least 2 weeks on down, you want to keep in Article 7.
I do.
Okay.
It does, as we review it closely, changing some of, striking 13 and 14, wrapping those up in 3, 4, and 6. It could change some of the references in this. We could look at it closely.
Okay.
That process for review is our concern.
So part of it says that department regs are subject to grievance procedure. You're willing to let that go?
I think I've missed something. Oh, okay. No, ma'am, I just missed that. So, we could have to look at that closely and,
But your interest is you want to keep language in Article 7 that gives a review process for new policies and procedures.
updates and
Okay.
newly written, yes, ma'am.
So you're fine with changing the discussion to policies and procedures from rules and regulations, but the content of this we want to discuss further.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Would you guys, in 6817, section 5, there's a management may, and we talk about management rights and that. Could you guys provide me, in your opinion, what you think would be something that would not fit into that category as far as the policies and
I
procedures?
think I have a document. If you just give me a second,
Yes.
Chief, I
Yeah.
might be able to pull something up.
Okay, we did review our policies and procedures to see how many things we believe are working conditions versus managers' rights, and we have an extensive list that we can reference for you.
Let's see.
Well, then that one should not, I'm sorry, that one should not be removed from the management rights. It should remain in this discussion that we're having this morning.
Does it
Is
seem
that-
appropriate to categorize this as management rights rather than the
I'd say,
process?
I'd say so.
Okay.
Okay, and then our package,
Mhm.
will, process package, as we
Mhm.
refer to it, is Article 3, 4, no, Article 3, yes, Article 3, 4, 6, 13, and 14.
That's what I wrote
That's what you
down.
have, okay,
Um,
I'll cross 7 out of that. I don't know how I ended up with 7, to tell you the truth.
So I just quickly took a look and through the policies that either are classified in our opinion as working condition, a wage or fringe benefit, or directly have to do with health or safety. One of those right off the bat is voluntary demotion. We've already talked about that. Near miss incident reporting, that has to do with how it's handled after we have a near miss, a near fatality of a firefighter or a serious injury. Incident rehab, that's a health and safety, how firefighters are cared for after, right, I guess, medical rehab during structure fires. Portable radios, rules of air management, accountability, lost trap.
Oh, just a second.
I'm sorry, do you want, Chief, would you like me to list the reference numbers from
No,
our
you
SOP?
can give me just the names, but just a little bit slower. so I
Okay,
can write
sorry.
it down.
I realized I was getting a little.
Portable radios was the last one I had.
Portable radios, the self-contained breathing apparatus, SBA, and personal alert safety systems. I believe that can be under health and safety. Rules of air management, accountability, lost, trapped, missing firefighters or mayday, rapid intervention team, incident strategy priorities. There's mentions of safety priorities during that SOP. Forced entry into secure properties, that's, for instance, when we need to make entry for a medical alarm. It discusses safety procedures there with having PD there. There's been some recent incidences of firefighters getting shot at within the last month, actually, I think, in that scenario. So that is a safety concern for us. Severe weather, that's something that just happened. What will be expected to do during severe, tornadoes going through the city. Civil disturbances, operations, riots, stuff like that, how we are expected to act, what we will be expected to do, how to stay safe. Structural PPE cleaning, that's a cancer, health and safety. The list, it's actually a pretty extensive list here. Security of facilities, health and safety management program, injury and exposure reporting, incident safety
So-
officer.
Would you say, with your extensive list, pretty much all of our policies then you could equate to safety or working
That's
conditions?
not, I wouldn't say that's accurate. We have quite a few SOPs that are not included in here. I don't have them listed out here, but if we can bring up the SOP list and go through it one by one.
I just wanted to get a sense of where they were lying.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back to section 7 as part of management rights this morning, then, is that what we're gonna do?
That's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
But I wanna make sure I understand your referencings. These are all department policies and procedures that you feel are, because of the language in Article 7 and because of the language in health and safety program team, are important to have those two things in the MOU? Or what section of the MOU are you relating these policies and procedures to?
These are policies from their department policies
Right.
that I believe have, or we believe either have references to firefighter safety. I made a list of what we would attach as a working condition, a wage fringe benefit, or health and safety concern within these policies that the department holds.
And what bullet are you wanting to discuss those policies under? What article of the MOU are you suggesting a new article in the MOU?
We're not suggesting a new article in the MOU. I believe we're under discussion of Article 7.
Okay,
And
so-
how that applies to the review process of these SOPs.
Okay, so Article 7 is the section of the MOU that we want to reference where you feel like these policies are part of the review process for policies and procedures.
The intent is simply to show that there are policies and
Okay.
procedures that are attached to working conditions and safety procedures, as well as wage and fringe benefits that do warrant a discussion that wouldn't be prohibited by manager's rights
Okay,
under Article 7.
under Article 7.
Because some of the ones I'd say, Seamus, that you listed could easily be interpreted as management rights. They're very specifically delineated in the resolution as compared to a pretty general description of working conditions. So, management rights are excluded in the conversation of working conditions.
Well, I think from a philosophical standpoint, we're going to be in disagreement on that.
I suspect we are.
So is Article 7 one of those sections that we should, the city has proposed some contract language for Article 7, and what I'm hearing is that you do not agree with that contract language. I think it might be a good idea to put exactly what your proposed contract language is in column 2. If you could provide that to us either in a Word document that Casey can cut and paste, or we can actually do it.
Pasted.
Oh, you did it already?
Well, I don't know, what I
Okay.
thought I heard was existing language, but change rules and regs to policies and procedures.
Okay, so does
Does
this,
that get
Yes,
at-
ma'am, we should use that, and we can look at it very closely, and see if they tweak that any, but that works for
Okay.
us.
perfect, thank you.
And then I added a note over here in the far column that says, this is what the note from 620 had said, that we exchanged subject to review of the grievance procedure, because it talks about the grievance procedure in the existing language. So then today I added the note 62219, clarified this was not meant to be part of the package discussed on 620. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And you washed out the TA.
Yep,
Okay.
it never had a TA next to it.
Oh, okay.
We just had a group of things that we were gonna put under a different discussion item as process rather than management rights.
Sure, okay.
Okay, so the next one under management rights is that I noted was 8.4.2. And I am very open if there's other, Dean, if there's other sections that you feel fall under this, or if anybody else at this table does, to add those to the agenda. I was attempting to make a comprehensive list, but I don't want to, by no means, indicate that I reviewed it 3 or 4 times. 8.4.2. 8.4.2 is one sentence that is part of a greater conversation of skill incentives, but the one sentence that the city feels is a management right and proposes to change the language is 8.4.2, and we propose the type or number of skill incentive positions may be increased or decreased by the chief. In other words, moving that to a management decision by the chief versus a collective decision, I guess, if you will.
Laura, just for clarification, does the city feel that the current language allows this to be a collective decision? From our perspective, it already has some of that similar language with the chief.
I think the city does not feel like selecting the number of positions that receive a skill incentive is the type of thing that should fall under a grievance process for either the union or an employee. That the number of them, the amount of the skill incentive, the dollar amount that's offered when it is awarded is something that should be in the MOU. But the actual number of employees who carry that skill incentive should be a decision that's a management right and should be the chief's decision, based on operational needs and a variety of other things that he is responsible for managing.
Laura, are we including the acting officer and education incentives as skill incentives?
I think it falls in that section. Does skill incentives has a number of subsections. There is acting officer is actually in the list, and then I know fire investigator, well, it's actually in the list, and then there's some discussion on how you award it. And I think the technician differential is the only one that's not actually in this list. I might be wrong. So yes, I think that number to be selected by the chief would include everything, including acting officer and
Okay.
all of the number of incumbents that hold that skill incentive would be all of those things. And I think there's one other reference in section 8 as well. 8.6.1 is much the same way. So I guess they could be tied into a similar discussion. We are proposing to strike that section because, again, that is a procedure for naming the number of acting officers, not the amount that the acting officer receives in pay, but the number. And the 2.5% is already referenced in 8.4.5. So we felt like that is already referenced and taken care of.
So we believe those sections are connected because we're talking about all skill incentives in 8.4.2, and then we can break it down and talk about specific ones like AO in another section. But the chief has the ability to move those numbers around. It is a safety concern. We can't have all members be acting officers, but of course we can't have any members be acting officers either. So it does become a working condition in that regard. Though we understand the point of view, what the city is trying to relate here. The acting officer incentive is specifically a big concern to us in regards to safety, and some of these other skill incentives really could be considered that as well.
How does the resolution reference staffing? Because acting officer is a staffing decision, in my opinion. It's determining how many people occupy that set of job duties. And I think, although I need to look it up, I think that is discussed.
Assignment is specifically management right.
Section 5F determine the methods, means, materials, assignments, and personnel by which city operations are to be conducted. And,
Also B too.
Oh yeah, B, hire, promote, transfer, assign, and retain employees. Also A, direct the work of its employees.
So by the definition that we work under, working conditions, which is where the safety falls in, indicates that we can discuss items for the MOU that are working conditions, but which are not management rights nor fixed by ordinance, statute, or constitution. And it specifically says that staffing
Mhm.
is a management right. So even though it may have safety components to it or working condition components to it, it's reserved by resolution to a management right.
So,
I would say that every management right has some safety component to
Mhm.
it that you could argue. But the resolution that authorizes all of this is very specific
mhm.
as to what the management rights are.
Yes, sir. So this is existing language, existing processes that have been agreed to by both parties for a very long time. Clearly, it's been important to both parties, and regardless of a resolution is stronger than what state law would say the city is required to do. An agreement can be stronger than what a resolution states we're required to do. And over the decades, both parties have agreed that these are areas that should be very strong. All it does is provide a mechanism for feedback in regards to working conditions like our safety.
I don't think our statements that we have a strong interest during this negotiation diminishes the interest that the city has in having good policies and procedures and in having appropriate staffing and having all of those things that everyone at this table desires to have. One of the things that we stated at the beginning of these discussions is that it was our interest to move things that were covered by resolution out of the MOU. So I'm not disagreeing with you that there isn't a history of it being important, and I'm not saying that there isn't a continued desire that it's an important item, just not one that we want to have in this document. And I understand your statement that it makes it stronger if it is included in here, but our desire is to move closer to the to move our documents closer to the resolution statements and not have things in 2 or 3 different places. And that kind of goes back to a couple of the things we've had discussions on during this MOU, to
Mhm.
keep things aligned with our resolutions, with our ordinances, with our handbooks, with
Yes, ma'am.
that sort of thing.
So we definitely understand that. We feel like the things that may seem like they're not in line with the resolution are really just providing employee groups the opportunity. It's just a formalized process, an opportunity to give that feedback, to be part of to be part of the conversation, to have a seat at the table. So it's really not denying a fire chief authority. It's simply providing employees formalized process to voice their perspective.
But then having it subject to the grievance procedure takes the ultimate authority out of management hands, doesn't it?
No, because I think that ends with the city manager's decision.
Does it
Does it?
always under
No.
your existing
There's
grievance
binding
procedure?
arbitration in it.
Is that if an individual,
If an individual does it. But if the association wishes and the employee organization wishes to grieve it, that is not the outcome. I mean, the final
Yeah.
resolution.
They
Mhm.
utilize the grievance procedure in 8.4.1.
I guess that we would just trust in that process,
What
all the way, the current grievance process.
The union grievance process that ends with binding arbitration.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
someone's gonna come in and determine whether those are safety concerns or safety issues, and I think that it's important that someone else comes in and says, yeah, that's a safety concern,
This
Someone
doesn't-
other than management.
federal, mediation.
I don't think this language limits it to just safety issues. It's the entire book of policies and procedures. So even if it was on uniform design.
But then I think federal mediation could just say, well, that's not a safety concern, so we're gonna side with city management on this.
This doesn't discuss that it's limited to safety.
No, it doesn't, but federal mediation could have that discussion.
Could.
And make that decision.
Could.
And if they don't believe that uniform design is a safety concern, that would be their decision, and that would be binding.
I'm not tracking with that at all. What are you saying?
We're saying both parties are subject to the decision of binding arbitration. There's not a history of grievances going that far. This is preparation for some extreme end of the spectrum from either side that has to be addressed, through a formalized process that ultimately results in a third party's decision. It's an important part of a labor management agreement.
So,
Well, it may be in some, but the authorization through the resolution doesn't contemplate that at all.
Nor does it limit though.
Well, I'd say it's limited by our form of government.
I think ceding decisions regarding our employees that are addressed in this resolution, ceding that to some outside federal entity just is totally inconsistent with the city manager form of government and not authorized by Kansas law.
And Tony, you've pointed out before the whereas clause in the resolution that says the governing body of the city of Lawrence believes that the interests of both the city of Lawrence and its employees are best served by maintaining the two-party relationship of individual employee and employer.
Correct.
So that doesn't limit binding arbitration, that whereas. However, I think we're still talking about 8.6 here, and we've kind of devolved back into the grievance procedure.
Oh, I was talking about 8.4.2, I'm sorry.
8.4.2 points specifically to the grievance
Okay,
procedure.
okay.
I'm
That's
sorry.
my mistake.
I'm the one adding in the second
No,
one
no.
because it was both under Article
The
8.
conversation is about the grievance procedure. This is referencing a grievance procedure, which we haven't hashed out.
Okay.
So we're requesting to keep the language that references something that we haven't talked about yet. Clearly, both parties' interest is obvious regarding that grievance procedure, so.
Okay, shall I move this one under a discussion after, when we get into the grievance procedure?
Well, it seems appropriate that grievance procedure will have a domino effect on some other articles and sections of the agreement.
But are we on 8.4.2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And-
I'm sorry. That was my mistake. I started talking about both of them.
But,
We were talking about them together, I think.
well, and I think because it references grievance procedure, it's obviously going to be part of the discussion. The existing language. Philosophically, though, I think both parties acknowledge that we are on very different planes in terms of what our concerns are. Our concern is a management right. We think the management rights section of the authorizing resolution is very clear, regardless of what has previously been negotiated. It seems contrary to the authorizing resolution to us. So, it may be that those are matters that when the federal mediator comes in, if they do, that those are discussions that have to take place there. And maybe they can help us with that. This is our last week, right, coming up?
Mhm. All of the dates that are listed on the back of our agenda are the remaining dates until impasse that we currently have scheduled. So it would be today and 4 additional. What is today, the 22nd?
Yeah, I
3
think we
additional
have,
meetings.
after today, we have, what, 3
3.
lengthy sessions scheduled, so.
I have a question.
Mhm.
If this, in the spirit of this document living beyond the people of this room for the next group after, if we were to get rid of language like this in combination with the language that says we don't have to pay people when they work out of class, what would stop any chief from getting rid of all incentives and then assigning people CSI, fire investigator, without any incentive pay? The pay studies talk about a pay philosophy that the city has, and it mentions compensating people. It says that their intent is to attract, retain, and motivate highly qualified, enthusiastic, productive, committed employees. They also mention compensating them fairly. So what would stop a chief if we got rid of all this language from getting rid of incentives and not compensating us fairly? It seems to me the chief's already making decisions on promotions, who gets the incentive. This just gives us an opportunity to, like as Dean said, have a seat at the table and discuss it.
In my mind, that is a conversation under section 8.4.2, which we haven't put in management rights, but we have proposed to strike. The city has to strike the language, but there is a discussion currently that talks about receiving it when you do the work. And I think that's probably more the discussion than the actual number of them, is what we end up with that language on 8.4.4.
Or you're going to 8.4.5.
Yeah, it lists the ones, and then 8.4.4 talks about a woman, a person who is being asked to do that work. And there is a proposal to strike it by the city, but that's where we talk about, if I do the work, will I get the incentive? 8.4.2 talks more about the number of incentives that are put into place on any given day, and we feel like that is the chief's management right to be able to choose the number of people that are asked to perform that work.
Is your question,
What
what stops the chief from saying 0? The number is 0. That's the appropriate number of people to get this incentive.
What's stopping them to get rid of all this language from saying that no, there are no incentives?
I can't hear you.
What's stopping the chief from saying that there are no incentive pays anymore, but the work still exists, the administrative duties, the extra incentive work still exists, and now you're doing it without being compensated?
I think we TA'd a list of incentives, skill incentives already, and that's 8.4.5. So there is agreement that there is a list of skill incentives for certain types of work already TA'd in this agreement and carried over from our current agreement. The discussion really is centering around who should get to select the number of people. That's today, this discussion under this bullet, who gets to select the number of people that get this incentive, the number of people that do this work. And then there's another bullet that's not yet on an agenda that talks about when do I start getting the incentive if I'm asked to do the work. And
But they kind of work together. I mean, one affects another. or could
I'm
possibly
not
do so.
necessarily opposed, if the rest of the table isn't, to putting a couple of numbers together for discussion. But I do feel like 8.4.4 is a different discussion item and not totally bound into the management right discussion that we're having this morning. But if it's better to talk by section rather than by topic, management right versus something else versus compensation, I'm happy to do that too. That was just the way we organized the agenda.
We appreciate that flexibility.
Yeah.
It's fair that we're discussing a section in this situation, section 8.4.2. It's fair that when we discuss that, it does tie into other sections. And really what we're saying, I know what Jason is saying, is that this language doesn't remove fire chief's authority to increase or decrease the number of members that can have an incentive. It's simply in the event that those numbers are increased or decreased to a concerning level, the membership has a way to voice that concern. Ultimately, it can still be decided that the chief's authority stands, and then we move forward.
And decided by whom, ultimately, if it's a real disagreement.
Well, it could be, I mean, it could go as far as binding arbitration.
And that's our objection.
Mm-hmm. But the
Yeah.
proposal's to remove all ability to voice it. It wasn't just to remove binding arbitration.
True.
So that's, we're having to talk about it.
If we remove incentives, when we change it, it hurts the individual, but how does it harm the union?
Well, anything that hurts the membership individually or as a whole, it's the union's responsibility to voice concern about that, Chief.
I think this all goes back to our objection to the binding arbitration provision that allows some third party that's unrelated to this city making a decision as to how this contract's gonna be interpreted. Ultimately, the city commission is the one that created the authority to do this. They should have the final say.
I think the
The
city,
commission represents the citizens of the community. They do it in a public process. Ultimately, they should make the decision.
Do you believe that this MOU that we currently have was approved by the city commission? And they ultimately made a decision to have this in the language?
Right. They may
So
not
that
have
was their
had the
decision to do that?
conflict pointed out with their other
You're saying they
resolution.
didn't understand?
I'm saying they may not have been aware of the conflict at the time they approved it.
Aware of the understanding that they support the agreement as it is, and this process to make those improvements, to modernize it, which would include the binding arbitration.
And I would say that a commission approved this resolution too. They just probably haven't had it pointed out. Those that have been here longer, has it been pointed out that there's a conflict between the resolution and the agreement?
not that I'm aware of. I think the city would be interested in seeing any counterproposal, knowing our strong interest in removing the binding arbitration from this section. If that would be something you'd be interested in, or if this is the language that you're, that is really important to you, then I would suggest that we copy it over into the second column and so
Okay.
state that.
So Lori, as section 8.4.2 stands, it just references the grievance procedure where we find the binding arbitration, so so the proposed language you're requesting would be for the grievance procedures.
No, just what would you, what?
Here, we would just request this extra language remains.
Okay. So you feel like the language in 8.4.2 is very good as written, and the city feels like it should be altered to our proposal of the type or number of skill incentive positions may be increased or decreased by the chief.
Yes, ma'am. So essentially, the city is proposing to remove some language, we're proposing to keep it. So no change from our side.
And it seems their positions are fairly strong on each side. So are we willing to move past this and not TA it and suggest that this is likely impasse?
Yes, sir. It may be that this is a reoccurring theme from here on out, because
I
that's
suspect
essentially
it could be.
that's essentially what our actually team is requesting to caucus. So
Okay.
Okay.
15, 20 minutes, and can we just do the our texting system?
Texting is
That seemed
perfect.
efficient.
Yes, that's
Great.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys, who she's on?
was gonna say, how's downstairs?
Okay, we're coming out of caucus. Dean, do you have any comment?
No, sir.
Okay. Laura, do you want to review what we discussed?
Okay. We looked at the language of 8.4.2 to see if there was any movement that we could make on that. And we do have a counter proposal with some revised language. We only have one handwritten version of it, so we'll put it up there. And it reads, please. So it would be for section 8.4.2, is that correct, that we've been discussing?
Yes.
So it would read, Section 5 of Resolution 6817 gives the chief the authority to determine the type or number of skill incentive positions. Nothing in Resolution 6817 precludes the chief from consulting with employees prior to making that determination. You want me to read it again?
Not for us.
Okay. And Casey, I think we can type that into the city section in our document. Would that be correct? We can type that in as our
Yeah.
proposal, effective today. We moved with this language because we felt, we felt that we are hearing from you that there is some desire to have input into the policies and procedures with the organization. Again, binding arbitration is something that we're pretty firm that we don't want in the upcoming MOU, but felt like this gave us an opportunity for employees to have input into policies and procedures. We don't think that the resolution precludes the chief from, soliciting input prior to making a decision, but we do feel like it is the chief's authority and responsibility to make that decision ultimately.
We'll take that under consideration.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on this section?
No, ma'am.
So I typed it in and added the date here, 6/22/19, city modified proposal to read. And then there's the language I just read.
Thank you. Okay. 8.6.1. We started to mention it and then moved and then backed up again. 8.6.1, the city has proposed to strike that section for the same reasons. Not that we don't believe the acting officer is an important skill incentive and an important thing to have, but we believe that the chief should have the authority to determine how many positions of acting officer are necessary for the organization. Not just now, but as the organization changes in size, it's important for the chief to be able to allocate resources where they're needed in order to, effectively run the department.
Lori, earlier you made a comment that the 2.5% was covered somewhere else in the contract.
Mhm.
What section did you say that was, just so I can write that down?
It is covered,
8.4.5.
thank you.
So Lori, our request is for no change. This process has identified that not only should the number of acting officers be in this agreement, but that number be specifically set to 15. And we do realize as lieutenant positions are added, that will change the number of acting officers. We currently aren't able to fill all of the vacancies anyway, but that it's still an issue of, again, of safety. Can't have everybody be an acting officer, can't have nobody be an acting officer. This agreement's to address those extreme ends of a spectrum. And it's, like I said, it's existed for a long time. Clearly both parties have found that value, and our request is for no change.
Chiefs, do you have any response to that?
Well, on the safety issue, I don't think it's that safety is important to all of us, but on the acting officer aspect of it, if we don't have officers on apparatus, we will call in for those apparatus to have officers. And then again, which we have run in the past, where we've had to staff a unit without an officer on the truck, the shift commander will not utilize that officer for specific, or that truck for specific duties on the fire ground. And on calls within the city, we will always run a fire apparatus with that, and we have that discussion with those companies to say, if there's not an officer on this medic truck, the engine company with the officer will run on the medicals. If it's in the county, the shift commander will run with them. That's how we kind of work on that, work through that.
Any response back or?
Yes, sir. Our point of view regarding safety is that an acting officer is limited in their experience, and it takes longer. They're limited in their experience because it takes longer to get it. And so if there are too many, then that means that experience is stretched even thinner. Of course, if there's not enough, which the department has been experiencing, they may be put into positions, at an accelerated rate. So trying to find that balance is, I understand, is part of management, and that's exactly why it's in this agreement. It's part of labor management, which is why it's in this agreement.
And I can say, as somebody who's been in that exact situation, although it is a goal to do that, it doesn't always happen due to resources available at the time. As far as running with a fire truck or having the battalion chief run in the county with you. Sometimes it's just not possible, and I have been in that situation.
I'm asking both sides because I want to hear the conversation. That's why I asked the chiefs and I asked you to count. Do you have any more?
Tom, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it says maintain a list of 15 firefighters. What's the significance of 15? Is it based on the number of shifts or?
It'd be 5 per shift. And if there's 5 stations in town, I guess the idea would be one each.
And the significance of that for acting officer versus calling out the specific number of other skill incentives is because this one is special or more important, or?
There's a chain, captain, lieutenant, acting officer, and so in the absence of a captain, the lieutenant moves into that role. In the absence of the lieutenant, the acting officer moves into that role. So having one person assigned to each station ideally helps that ease of, ease of transition. Again, it's a staffing goal, and being a 24/7 service, there are extenuating circumstances that can't be predicted, and occasionally labor management has to be creative. However, overall, and most of the time, this works.
And that's a good question. Why do you think we don't, in the agreement, doesn't call out for all the other incentive positions and have those numbers on them, and we only have it for acting officers?
Yeah, like why not clothing supply clerk or CPR coordinator? Why are those, is it, and this is just my lack of operational understanding.
Well, I believe the acting officer is most closely tied to that, or to that safety component we keep mentioning. This person is serving in as a company officer on the emergency scene, which could include interior fire attack. These others are not put in those IDLH atmosphere or life and death circumstances, and so there's more wiggle room for discussion and a lot less urgency.
Tactical medics aren't put in dangerous
Chief,
positions.
that's a good point, and in retrospect, a proposal to include a specific number of tactical medics would have been appropriate.
But you didn't propose that.
No, sir, we did not during this process. We were sensitive to the time frame. We tried to limit our proposals to those that we felt could be discussed thoroughly with resolution, given the time frame.
Is it an unwritten practice to have 2 TAC medics per shift? Or is it a policy written down? We do have 2 per shift, is that right?
We do have 2 per shift.
Is that an unwritten policy?
It is, I have to review the policy, I don't know if it specifically says you have to have 2 per shift. But on tactical medics and the duty people that go, are, if they are deployed, those ones are the last 2 chosen to keep operations staffed, so we call back in tactical medics for events.
Are there other incentives that do line out how many per shift? I know some don't, so I feel like some do.
I'd have to review them, I don't know off the top of my head.
What do you guys know?
But I think some do, some don't. I mean,
Which ones do? You could let, I don't know right off the top of my head, but if you want to bring that in, we'd be glad to discuss it. Just to-
yeah, on red or special policy, but I believe.
Chief, is
We
that
try to-
going
Well, I think that was adjusted somewhat, as you know, recently with computer, was it technology specialist? Those are not even per shift.
Correct.
So,
That's under like an consultant. Maybe we try to get 2 per shift.
try, I think is the key word.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, is it unwritten, is that a written policy or unwritten
I don't know,
policy?
you'll have to refer to the policy and then let us know, because I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So if you want to check and let me know, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
Laura, our question for management would be, that information, does it move this conversation about the number of acting officers forward? Is that something that's tied to the city's perspective of including acting officer numbers in the agreement?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes. It's part of what we feel is a management right.
Why don't we caucus for a while?
Okay. About how long shall we?
Oh, about 15 minutes.
Sir, is there something we could be considering more specifically during this
No, I
caucus?
want to talk to the management team about this particular provision.
Yes, sir.
15.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're ready. Kurt? The city considered the comments that we made during our discussion on 8.6.1, and again have a counter proposal for language. Casey?
Yep.
would you like to-
So this is section 8.6.1, and it would read, Section 5 of Resolution 6817 provides the chief the authority to determine the number of authorized acting officer incentives. As of January 1st, 2020, the chief has established, that says 15, authorized acting officer incentives. The actual incentives assigned are determined by the chief. Nothing in Resolution 6817 precludes the chief from consulting with employees prior to making these determinations. So I'm gonna type that into the city's column and add today's date.
So I think the city took to heart your comments that you wanted to have some opportunity for input on that, and I think that we, in our best efforts, are listening to you and trying to provide you with that opportunity in the document.
You're saying that's addressed by the, does not include the chief from that part?
You want to comment or think about that?
Yeah, well, James,
No,
Okay.
look at it.
we'll just take it under consideration. Thank you.
Next section, Lori?
Okay, next section is 9.2.1, annual hours worked. Casey, tell me if you want me to slow down just for a second.
I'll catch up.
9.2.1 currently reads, employees assigned to work 24-hour shifts shall be scheduled to 2912 hours per year. Employees assigned to 8-hour workdays shall work 2080 hours per year. And the city has proposed to strike this, as it is one of the management rights, and I think we quoted it in our notes down there. Determine methods, means, materials, and assignments by which personnel by which the city operates is in the resolution. And we feel like while we're not really looking at schedule changes or hour changes or anything like that, there may be times when it becomes necessary either to increase that or decrease that. And we believe the chief should have the authority to do that, should that become necessary.
Well, we believe that work hours are a part of wage, and the work hours that we've applied, the job we've applied to is for a certain type of schedule for a certain amount of time, and that is not management right, that is working condition, and that having a 24-hour rotating shift change for any length, for any reason is very concerning.
I guess I should point out in closer reading of this, if we leave it in here, the 8-hour employees don't actually work 2080 a year. The holidays are included in that number, and they don't work on those holidays.
Okay.
I don't think most of them. It's actually, what is that, 9 times 8, 72 hours less than that. So while I work to bring that up, so your interest is in having, let me see if I have this, if I understand this correctly. Your interest is having employees in full-time positions versus something less or more than full-time positions as they appear today, the 2912 or the 2080, as I know we'll refer to the 8-hour people as. Is that the interest?
Laura, yes, our interest is to not strike this language and to keep it as is. The work hours and shift schedule is a working condition.
Okay. Hi- Can you talk about that a little bit? So our number of hours a year and the shift schedule, I don't even think this talks about shift schedules, other than the number you have in a year, the 24-hour shift.
Well, that's what I'm referencing, is the employees assigned to work 24-hour shifts shall be scheduled 2912 hours per year. So that's work hours in that shift schedule. That's okay. We can just say work hours. If assigned to that 24-hour shift, the employee can expect to work 2912 as a condition of working.
And that's a working condition. Explain that just a little bit, how that impacts your working conditions.
Well, that's when becoming an employee, the understanding is that we're going to be working 2,912 hours per year on a 24-hour rotating shift. If that is subject to change, that will affect that condition of work that we applied for.
Okay, you mentioned wages. Does it mostly have to do with it impacts your annual wage, or the conditions
Yes, ma'am.
with which you're
It does
required
both.
to work?
It does both. Our employees have adjusted their lifestyles to meet the commitment they make to their employer, and also have adjusted their financial health based on how much they are expected to work.
Okay, so it has a lot to do with the total compensation package, more than whether it's an inappropriate working condition, like, I don't know what inappropriate
Yes,
might
ma'am.
be.
We believe it's both, but it is tied to compensation. That is
Okay.
part of how we're paid, is based on that, those number of work hours. You know.
Okay.
So if the dean of the department, the chief, the administration of the department decided for purposes of efficiency or coverage or something else and needed to alter that schedule, you would oppose their having the management right to unilaterally do that?
To unilaterally change our schedule?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We would represent the membership's point of view. I'm
So lay out,
confident that they would oppose that change.
okay, so lay out a process that's consistent with management rights and what you view working conditions that would work to satisfy both of us.
Sir, do you mean like the way things?
Well, if we had to
are
change it, how
currently
would you
scheduled?
propose that it be done?
If we had to change our schedule?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that would be circumstantial, and, I'm not prepared to address a hypothetical situation.
Well, schedules get changed in departments all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to understand what you think the process would be to do that.
Sir,
representing your
as a
employees.
24/7 service, I can't imagine, I just can't imagine.
What other schedules are out there?
What's that?
So do we mean like a 24/48 or a 48/96? Is that what we mean?
FDNY, I think, works 14/10 or 12/12.
Okay. Well, I mean, if we want to talk about other department schedules, we can do that. I know a lot about it. I know through personal relationships with members of FDNY that on the books that is how their schedules are, and that they're constant. It's an administrative nightmare. They're constantly all in a trade so that they work 24-hour shifts, but on the books you're working like a 12-hour shift and then a 12-hour trade, and it's just something that their department is dealing with, not ours, and this isn't about FDNY. There are other shift schedules, if that's what you mean, like a 48/96 or a 24/48. And if management were to lean one of those directions, it would merit a conversation, and the membership would conduct a meeting, and we would receive direction and represent that point of view.
Okay.
Our big concern would be a reduction, moving from your 24-hour rotating shift to suddenly working less hours than that.
Okay.
That's-
Let's caucus.
trips and I park my car. Are we all ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Kurt, we're ready. Okay, we were on section 9.2.1, and during our caucus, we spent some time writing some counter proposal for language, and we'd like to show that to you.
So section 9.2.1, annual work hours. Determination of annual work hours is a management rights decision under section 5 of resolution 6817. Management has determined for the duration of this MOU, the employees assigned to work 24-hour shifts shall normally be scheduled 2,880 to 2,952 hours per year, and employees assigned to 8-hour shifts shall normally be scheduled approximately 2,008 hours per year. And I think, Chief, you were going to explain the range of numbers there.
So, utilizing 365 days in the year, 2912 is somewhat of an average. This year, if you look at it, X shift works 123 days for 2,952 hours. Y shift works 120 days for 2,880. Z shift 122 for 2,928 days, or hours, excuse me. And so we just wanted to put those hours in there, knowing that there's a range of hours, 365 days a year.
I think you get paid by the hour worked anyway, right?
Yes, sir.
So obviously, we've made a strong position on management rights, and yet I think we recognize that the employees want some assurance as to what their schedule is. So this ensconces your schedule during whatever the duration of the contract is that's coming up. And obviously, while I wouldn't say we're going to negotiate what that is, we have no plan to change any schedule. We've had no discussion about changing any of your schedules. So it really was more a philosophical argument. I think, unless I suppose there was some amendment to the agreement, okay, which would be bilateral, this says that the schedule will be the same through the duration of the contract. Understood?
Yes, sir. We understand the city's perspective, and we'll review this new language. Thank you.
And I hope you understand that this was an effort to kind of balance the philosophical differences between the two of us about those things.
Yes, sir.
Dean, before we move on to the next section, I know we've had a couple of caucuses, and I was just wondering if you wanted to circle back around on the first two items that we proposed in counter language, 8.4.2 or 8.6.1.
No, ma'am, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, Casey, are you ready?
I have added the revised proposal that we just presented to the city's column and dated it 6/22/19.
The next section under management rights is 9.13, 9.140. And we've kind of, and I have notes, we've talked about this in a couple of different areas, and so it pops up, oh, I moved it over here after the last meeting. And I don't know if warrants more discussion, or if we just want to note that it's under the management rights. I do have a note that at the end, and maybe we don't have it in any of the columns yet, but I did have a note that outlining the process was an issue of safety to the IAFF and staying, okay, I write in notes, not in full sentences. But you had given us a counter proposal, I believe, that we did not put in that column there.
In 913?
Yeah, it was some discussion, and I have some brackets here of things that you were interested in. Maybe Dean, maybe you could repeat it to us one more time, and just for clarification.
Yes, ma'am, I can reference our notes, but, we don't want any change in this section. Let me just look at that real quick.
So copy and paste it.
I know, I had
Put it into your column.
Yeah, I don't think we made a counter proposal. Ma'am, if we had any counter proposal, it was just to keep the language as is.
Okay, and Lori, can you distinguish between, as a reminder now, between the city employee handbook policy versus the language in the agreement?
Oh,
What are the major points of difference?
The city handbook policy simply states that the city has, Casey's pulling it up here, it's very short, and it states the city has the authority to terminate any employee because of lack of funds or curtailment of work after giving notice of at least 90 days to the employee. So there's no process in the city agreement for,
Required in the agreement?
yeah, for who we pick or how the process might go in a reduction of staff. And it also gives 90 days. So the major differences I see without reading what's in the agreement currently is the current agreement says 14 days versus 90 days in the city handbook. And then it gives a discussion that part-time employees and temporary employees will be first reduced. It gives a procedure for reduction that we discussed last time for the vast majority of what's in the agreement.
And what does the LPOA MOU do?
Oh goodness, I'd have to look it up. It might be silent on it, but I would need to look it up.
I'll look.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
So here, 11.1.3, the city in its discretion shall determine if furloughs, layoffs, or reduction in force are necessary. The city will determine the process and criteria following the policy contained in the
Oops.
city employee handbook.
Okay,
Published in date.
thank you. You have any other comments about your position on that?
Yes, sir, we can elaborate just a little bit. We understand that handbook language, appreciate the attention to this. That the process outlining the reduction of staff and consequently rehiring of staff is our primary interest. The the amount of time given for, the amount of, for notice. Obviously, 14 days versus 90 days is a big difference. And not that we would object to having it in line with the 90 days, but it's that process for the reduction, and then of course the rehiring that is our primary interest here.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next section.
The next section is 9.18, 9.18.
I think they have a proposal on this one. Minimum staffing, right?
Minimum staffing, and both the city and the IAFF had a proposal on this section that are different, very different. And the city's latest proposal, the last one given, was to strike this section, and that we feel like it's a management right under Resolution 6817. And I think we'd be interested, we discussed it several meetings ago, but interested in having it reviewed again with us.
So essentially, though we've tried to write the language in a way that's updated, the essential difference to existing language in our proposal is just acknowledging NFPA 1710 as the industry standard for what minimum staffing means. It's just an acknowledgement by the city, but that is important to us.
Does anybody have this adopted in departments in our comparable communities? Has anybody adopted this full standard that you know of?
Chief, no, sir, I would have to research that. I don't know offhand if anyone has that in their contract.
We asked that question.
And does anybody have the standard that we currently have?
The current NFPA standard that we're currently using?
The current language that we have?
Sir, I don't know what language regarding minimum staffing exists in other contracts. When we addressed this before, we talked about in regards to safety, though we believe in comparables makes sense regionally, wages and benefits, but Lawrence, we set our own pace, we set the standards. Other departments can compare themselves to us. Regardless of whether or not NFPA 1710 or language similar to that exists within their contracts or department policy, it can exist in ours because both sides believe in this wholeheartedly and have this as the the goal here. So.
Additionally, we feel that the Lawrence is unique compared to our comparable cities in this manner, such that we're not surrounded by other communities that are kind of talk about being on our island and other responses for other utilities.
Okay.
Time out.
I get that. All right. I'd like to caucus again on these two sections, but during that time, I'd ask that you go back and look again at the provisions that we've countered earlier.
Okay.
And try and come up with some sort of response as to those.
Yes, sir.
Fair enough?
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
On the two sections, we need this one.
Minimum
and
staffing and
Personnel reduction.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And this will probably take us a half hour.
Okay.
I had a TA in there and didn't.
Back and reviewed those, and we'll go first, and then you can talk about what you want to talk about coming out of your caucus. And I think what we looked at both of those provisions and had some counter proposals on each of them. And I think our efforts are partly to understand the context that you bring to the discussion, as well as our concerns about both management rights and internal equity. So why don't you go through the two reactions? They're fairly simple, so.
The first one is a 9.13 personnel reduction, and Casey has put in the city column a counter proposal to the proposal that we originally had. And Casey, can you read that to us real quick?
So it was, well, I'll just read it. Section 9.13, personnel reduction. The city in its discretion shall determine if furloughs, layoff, or reduction in force, layoff, sorry, I missed an S, or reduction in force are necessary. The city will determine the process and criteria following policy contained in the city employee handbook.
And this mirrors the language that's in the LPOA agreement for them. And then
Then the next one.
the next one is 9.18, minimum staffing.
Hold on, let's roll a bunch. Reasons policy, which is like 6 pages long. Then
And-
for section 9.18.1, go ahead, Lori, from there.
Understanding that this is an important section to the IAFF and language in the MOU is important, we are withdrawing our proposal to strike this section and to maintain the current language in the MOU. And that's what we've copied over into the third column is the current language.
I'm just putting it out, city was gonna provide proposal to retain, existing contract language. And then copy and paste.
Anything else, Lori?
Those were the two sections that we worked on.
Okay. Dean, any comments or thoughts coming out of caucus?
No, so we appreciate the attention and the counter or revised proposals and even withdrawn proposal here. So we'll consider those and review them thoroughly. And then we have, the things that you asked us to focus on. We didn't get quite through all of them, but we do have some stuff. I'll try to pull it up here. Okay.
Got it right here, Dino.
Yep, thanks. So that first one was what, 8.4.2?
Yeah.
So to address 8.4.2. So we've essentially added to the city's proposed language change, so it would read like this, and I'll just read the entire thing. Resolution 6817 gives the chief the authority to determine the type or number of incentive positions. Nothing in Resolution 6817 precludes the chief from consulting with employees prior to making that determination. We add, if increases or decreases in type or number of skill incentives become a safety concern, the IAFF Local 1596 may utilize available processes to address these concerns, including the grievance procedure. So that would be our counter, would be to add that last part, and I can slow it down and review it with Casey to type it. That's where we are with that.
You can just email it to her.
Okay, we'll forward this to her.
Thank you. If you could forward it to both Casey and myself.
Yes, ma'am, I'll
Make
forward
sure it
that.
gets in there.
Right now.
We wrote language specifically addressing the safety aspect of that, because as we stated, that was where our perspective was coming from on this issue. And just to reiterate the fact that if we were going to have issues with those, as a union, as the membership would recognize, issues with any decisions regarding the types or number, it would be from a safety standpoint, and that would be the situation in which we would ensure that that conversation would happen and that we would be able to voice our concern. So.
How important would it be, you've referenced the grievance procedure up to and including the grievance procedure, and we all know we're like at opposite ends on the union being able to utilize as the union, the grievance procedure. If for some reason we resolve that where it does not include a union component or some revised union component, how important is it? Would you be willing then to come back to this section and modify this accordingly for whatever the outcome of that proposal is?
Laura, I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. You mean pending the discussion on the grievance procedure and how that turns out to look, is it going to affect this proposed language?
I could see it potentially affecting this language. I guess the note would be is that we would definitely want to come back and revisit that depending on the outcome of the grievance procedure.
Yes, ma'am, that's understood.
What I think the city will do with these two, if you have counter proposals on both of them, is that we'll listen to the language and discuss it and ask questions today, but given the time, we'll meet before our next meeting and be able to respond after that. Is that reasonable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We did not have a response prepared for 8.6.1, the acting officer, but we do for 9.2.1, annual work hours. And is it possible to display the city's proposed language,
Oh, sure, certainly.
and then we'll speak to it?
In this, or would you like it on the Elma, the handbook?
This works.
Okay, and that's 9.2.1.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
We can TA this pending removal of the first sentence. Determination of annual work hours is a management rights decision. Clearly, we believe work hours is tied to working conditions such as our wage and compensation, and so we can TA the rest.
So your counter proposal
Just to strike that.
is
first
everything below, everything starting with management.
And if
Okay.
Can you scroll up just a little bit?
yes, ma'am.
Put today's date on that one as well. We will review those prior to our meeting on Wednesday, if that
Yes,
is
ma'am.
acceptable.
And we'll continue to review as well and be prepared to discuss those items
Okay.
on Wednesday.
If you, in your conversations between now and Wednesday, have a counter proposal for 8.6.1, feel free to send that to us ahead of time, and we'll try and review that as well.
We'll do it.
Okay?
Yes.
So for the next agenda, we'll just continue on with the items we have. But one thing I think we should discuss as well is future process. Because we have a looming deadline, obviously on July 1st. And so I think we should discuss how we progress through that period of time. We haven't got any meetings scheduled in July at this point. So we should probably talk about how we want to handle that at some point. We have 3 meetings left in June, so hopefully we can reach some consensus. It may be informative to hear from Lori about the process kind of as it evolved with LPOA
Okay.
and kind of the timing sequence, because if you look at the language at impasse and then post-impasse, it's a little quirky. You know, there's still opportunities to negotiate. So before, you know, the mediator actually gets here. And I don't think the circumstances have changed, but if we got to impasse and we got to a mediator, it's likely it'll be the same mediator we had last year. And because it's the only mediator in the office that serves this area. And my suspicion is that will be entirely at their discretion as to scheduling, okay? Because it's when that person can meet, and they're booked, you know, all sorts of places at this point, anybody that's using federal mediation. So it would seem like it would be to our advantage to at least have a discussion and make sure you know what we know and that we know what you know about process and kind of where we're headed. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. So if we can add that, we'll have that part of the conversation.
Great.
Okay.
So for the next agenda, we had on new business today, well, old business, we would continue through the management rights until we finish this section. And then we had Article 5 and Article 10 as the next new business. But we had also discussed last time that on the 26th, we would discuss Article 8, which is the compensation. So I guess I would just ask the table what order we want to do those next 3 items, Article 5, Article 8, and Article 10. And then I'll also put on the agenda the going forward discussion on expectations and what we want to do there, as Tom just mentioned.
Is there an order that's most convenient for the city?
Not really, I
Okay.
don't think.
Well, I think we should finish up management
Well,
rights
okay.
for sure.
We want to finish up management
Let's do
rights
that.
first.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
And then 5 seemed to be already kind of locked in, so I would say we continue with this agenda that we have on the 22nd. But then what are our options after that?
Well, Article 8 was something we purposefully, I think, wanted to discuss
Yes.
next Wednesday. But if we continue through what we've put on here, it's doubtful unless we move really fast. And I know we're committed to moving as fast as reasonable, but, you know, caucus
I'd like
time
to
is
see
big.
that on Thursday and try and get us to focus on the rest of this stuff, to at least get, I mean, if we're not gonna agree to something, we're not gonna agree to it. We can do our counter proposals back and forth, and at some point, I suspect that either we'll accede to each other's provisions or not,
Mhm.
right? It would be good to try and commit to get this stuff done on Wednesday, and then focus on economics on Thursday,
Great.
to me.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I will continue with management rights, Article 5, Article 10, and then Article 8. if we happen to get there, but knowing that that's really a Thursday discussion for sure.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable?
And Wednesday, you know, maybe what we should do is just try and bring in whatever we're gonna have for lunch and try and, you know, not necessarily making it a working lunch, but maybe shorten the lunch hour and just get something to eat it for a half hour, and we can caucus during that time.
Okay.
Something like that, instead of breaking for a whole hour, but
Mhm.
keep the same time frame, because that's a lot to cover, you know.
Yes, sir.
But some of those things, I think, don't rise to the level of minimum manning and some of the other issues that I think are
Mhm.
much more significant,
Mm-hmm.
so, okay?
All right.
Okay, so everyone brings their lunch for Wednesday, the 26th. We meet at 9:30 and adjourn at 3:30. And I will type up the agenda, management rights, Article 5, Article 10, and then Article 8.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yes, ma'am. We'll pack our Lunchables and Capri Suns.
All right,
We're on it.
okay.